Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Immunity Blueprints Summit. I'm Lindell Gaudio, my co-host, Emily Fisher Bunker, and I am thrilled. I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time, our interview with Rob Scott. You guys, if you don't know who Rob Scott is, you got to check him out. Rob is a master level personal development coach, and his mission is to evolve consciousness. Just a small mission. Rob's pioneered a process called identity shifting, which has helped hundreds of thousands over the last decade alone. It's based on the idea that profound change requires erasing limiting beliefs and shifting your self-concept. He's created a transformational 6-week mastermind that takes a select group of people through his proven breakthrough process, resulting in permanent transformation. Rob, we are so excited that you're here. Thank you so much for joining us. And to start it off, can you just tell the viewers a little more about yourself that maybe I missed, and how you got involved in this line of work that you're in?
Sure. First off, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for having me. This is great. I really want this talk to be valuable, and I hope we can get, to a lot of really useful things for everyone. I have been doing this kind of work for about 14 years now, full time. And I started out my life in a situation where like so many kids, I ended up going through a lot of abuse as a little guy. So fairly dysfunctional home life, some addiction, some, different kinds of abuse. There was a neighbor who babysat me for a long time, and I actually went through some really deeply abusive physical, sexual abuse, and just really tough stuff, especially from, say, the ages of like 3 to like 8 or 9. Okay. And that led me to learning how to manage my own emotional state through self-medicating, right? So stealing alcohol. There were college kids next door who got me started on pretty heavy drugs when I was 7. I was in one of my homes. I'm a product of divorce. In one of my homes, I was allowed to smoke in my house as early as 10 years old. As long as I asked, to have a cigarette, they wanted me doing that rather than burning the house down, kind of sneaking them. And my privileges of smoking kind of grew year over year. And I think I got full privileges on my 16th birthday or something like that. So what ended up happening, though, was I didn't really evolve a healthy emotional and mental reality, right? I didn't have the basis of safety and trust and things like that, like we would hope a child gets. And then along with addiction and things like that, it got very, very bad. And so I was really dysfunctional all through school. In my late teens and early 20s, addiction was a much bigger thing for me. I ended up homeless. I was in and out of all kinds of institutions, halfway houses, rehabs, jails, all the ways. And, I ended up homeless and was out on the streets. And so my company is now called Fundamental Shift. The reason for that is I really did have this profound shift in my consciousness, a different way where my awareness started to work. And I really started to see these stories that I was carrying. One example that was very loud for me was just a victim story where, I had been through so much. I got a big payoff for being a victim. And so I would get attention from women by telling them how tough it was for me. And guys might think I was tough, or at least I thought they did, et cetera. But if you carry that story, you tend to find yourself in situations where that can remain true. And so I really had this epiphany, and this was based on just either feeling like I was going to die. I mean, there's lots of stories I could tell you about where I almost died many times. And I just decided I didn't want to, and I wanted to come back. And so I ended up deciding, what if I had no stories? What would happen if I really just kind of erased the slate and came at life differently? And once I really started to apply that, I went from homeless, got a temp job in a company, went up the corporate ladder, did all these things. And in just a handful of years, I ended up vice president of technology at a company here in Philadelphia that was ultimately doing, that was a global company. And so it was, a profound transformation in applying this in my own life. And so in about 2005, I started one of the first podcasts that was ever out there. And I started sharing some of my ideas on there about how to transform your mind? What is it to evolve consciousness? What, on a personal level, what's hypnosis? What is NLP doing? What are all these tools that we have? What's meditation about? And so I started sharing that, and people all over the world started asking me for coaching. And at first I really resisted it. And I ended up doing it with a friend who was also my chiropractor. And he was like, I would hire you right now. And because I cared about him, I decided to start working with him. And as soon as I did it, I really realized that I had been doing this almost my whole life, working with my parents when they were dysfunctional when I was a kid. I was trying to get them to see things differently or, have a different point of view. So it's sort of been in me the whole time. And, then I left that, and it's about 2006 that I left the corporate world and I started this company full time. And over those 14 years, I've just been developing these tools and really seeing what is the most effective way to get past dysfunction and trauma, and people who are very together, what turns them into exceptional people. And so much of that is wrapped up in our sense of self and in our identity, and how we're using memories and all these different things. And so I've got some really profound tools to help people dramatically change their life.
Wow.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah, part of me wants to say I'm so sorry for everything you've been through, but it all kind of culminated. It brought you to where you are here. And it's so interesting that, it sounds like when you were at it sounds like you had more than one rock bottom. But you intuitively knew what to do, and you were drawing on those experiences of your youth.
Yeah.
And everything you had learned. So that's really fascinating.
Well, it's funny because I didn't tell you during that corporate, rise or whatever we might want to call it, I got really sick with cancer. I almost died of cancer. I had to go through a very, operations and chemotherapy and all those kinds of things. And so, once I did get to whatever that next level was, I really, I'm deeply in touch with what it is to be dysfunctional physically, mentally, emotionally, in all the dimensions. I was really bad in all of them. And so, figuring out how to, now run my own company and, have a small team of people going and be doing work that I'm so connected to and is deeply connected to my purpose. And, it's hard to report on yourself and really have people believe you. So it's not about people believing me, but, I'm deeply, deeply happy. I really am just so incredibly connected to what I'm up to and the work that I get to do, and just what music feels like and washing dishes. And so all of this is some of the stuff I want to teach or share today, because there are these little moves we can make that really change the game in how we experience life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So there's a whole lot to unpack there. You talked about, physical and mental and everything. So can you talk a little bit how thought affects the physical body, especially maybe as it relates to our immune system and our health in general?
Yeah, sure. And I'm excited about this. I think a really good place to start is to say that humans are, I like to say, the only creature. I don't really know if that's true or not, but we're certainly a creature that can, we deal with triggers all the time. We've got life happening, and we might get overwhelmed or anxious or scared or into a difficult situation. And, that's kind of the challenge of what life is. Like, how well can you overcome those things? But what's really interesting to just know is that we can actually sit in a room with no stimulus at all. It could be just a white room. You're completely safe. Nothing wrong is going on. And just through the act of thinking, you can cause a panic attack, right? You could fall into a deep depression and want to kill yourself. You could, just through our own meaning making and thinking, we can affect all these things. And so, one of the things I challenge clients to think about is, imagine spending the next 10 minutes just focusing on all the miserable things that have happened to you, all the things that are deeply unfair, all the things that are so upsetting, right? Well, how do you think the quality of your experience of those 10 minutes is going to be? Are you going to be angry and sad and depressed? And, is your energy going to be down, or is your energy going to be, excited or kind of bummed? By contrast, if you spent the next 10 minutes just thinking about all the things that you're grateful for, right? What is amazing in your life? What might be possible, right? Some goal setting or imagining a bigger future. How would that experience of the next 10 minutes be? And so it's not to ignore the problems. I'm not somebody who doesn't want to look at what's wrong or what needs fixing. But that management of our attention becomes really, really important because so many of us don't know what we're doing and all that. And it really does have a tangible effect on our biology, right? So we're reacting to triggers all the time. Those can come from the outside, right? If you're in a difficult situation and you're being abused, that's going to trigger certain things, of course. But let's not forget that we can do it with our own thinking as well, right? That's really important, that this can come from the outside or the inside. What happens in the brain when we're doing this is that neurons tend to fire as a response to some of these triggers, right? And so the more they fire together, they tend to wire together, right? So when they're wiring together, we end up with fatter and fatter things known as neuronal bundles, which just make it easier to think in certain ways. It's like a shortcut to make meaning in certain ways that we hope help us, and often it does. But if we end up in a situation where we've been through a lot of abuse or we have a lot of negative thinking, we can end up with really strengthened pathways in the brain that tend to trigger this kind of loop of negative thinking, or always being angry, or always being stressed, or different things like that. So thoughts can drive that same neuronal firing. And what happens then is it ends up hitting our limbic system in the brain. And the limbic system is much more related to causing emotional feelings and how whether we're angry or scared or sad or happy, etc. And those feelings set off the autonomic nervous system, right? So we've got the sympathetic nervous system and we've got the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is really trying to prepare the body for intense physical activity, okay? And it's often referred to as the fight or flight response. So if we get anxious, right, that tends to fire off in our limbic system, the sympathetic nervous system. By contrast, if we're calm and we can relax, the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. And that's almost the exact opposite effect of what's going on with the sympathetic nervous system. It relaxes the body, does things like allows us to digest and just do different things and rest, etc. And so the point here is that these things drive the creation of literal hormonal responses in the body. So adrenal glands, start to kick out things like cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine. These are all the stress hormones. And this ultimately legitimately changes the biology, your physical reality, literally who you are in that moment. And so those stress hormones, by the way, things like caffeine can do this too, right? So what we're ingesting, whether you're taking a lot of alcohol or drugs or different foods or sugar or any of those things, right? Pharmaceuticals, alcohol, recreational drugs, all those things, all of these go back into creating what is the biology of you in the moment. And to complete the loop, this goes back to what your neurons are going to do with new stimuli. Because if you're really anxious, your meaning making and what you're going to want to fire in the moment is going to be different than if you're calm and feeling confident or feeling grateful or feeling different. So something that's important to take away from this is you can change your thought in an instant. And in that, you can really change your reality in an instant. But there's lag time to these, which is important to realize. So your physiology might be pumping out sort of out of balance or stressful chemicals through you. And so one way to think about it is that your thoughts are kind of this moment reality, right? Like where your attention is and what's going on. But the chemistry that's going through your body is more like your recent reality, right? Those stress hormones may still be pumping through you, even if you've moved to a gratitude thought or you're trying to meditate or you're doing something else. A longer history of you is really what your genetics are up to, what's going on in your genes. So we almost have this sort of like now recent history and then the long-term history of you. And genes, we're finding out through epigenetics and things like that, they're not even as fixed as we really thought they were. They can express differently under different circumstances and all that. But if we talk about how does thought affect immunity and biology and all those things, mastering how we think and ultimately how we emotionally feel and how we behave, like our choices to do addictive things or food or sugar, that's the whole game of what's happening and what leads to obesity and heart disease and being much more unhealthy to if there's a virus going around or whatever's happening in the world, what our immunity system is like. So that's what's, how they're related.
So, oh, sorry. So I have several questions out of that. One, I guess the first question I would ask is, or maybe it's more of a statement. In order to really have our thoughts positively affect us, we have to make a practice of being positive then, so that because it sounds like if we go from a negative thought to a positive thought, your body's in lag, so it's sending that response of a negative thought before the body can catch up to the positive thought. So you want to try and keep it the same, so that
I wouldn't say you have to, right?
Okay.
Just a single positive thought is better than another negative thought on top of it, right? So I don't want to sell it down the river, but I also I want people to understand that there can be a lag, right? So if you've just gotten a shock and you're completely anxious or you're in a panic or whatever, a positive thought is going to be a good choice in that moment. I mean, an appropriate positive thought. I don't mean delusional. I don't mean that you're making up fictions. I talk about something called useful thinking, which is, a way that we can start to, not just be lying to ourselves, but we're doing something that's useful in the moment. Making it habitual, though, will tend to make neuronal bundles that are helping you more automatically stay grateful, stay confident, stay centered, stay calm, etc. But if you've had a lifetime of anxiety, it's, that one thought is up against not only the fat neuronal bundles that are way more used to making meaning that's overwhelming and scary, but also your body may be completely out of balance. That's why any of these dimensions can be helpful. Like if you just went on a cleanse or a fast, or you just stopped an addiction or whatever, the beginning of that might be very, very difficult because it's a change and it's scary and it's different. But very often the long-term effects of that are serious health coming back to you, right? Sometimes it's weight loss, sometimes it's heart disease going away, sometimes it's these different things. That person may not have managed how they're thinking differently, but they've managed the habit of putting bad foods and instead they're putting better foods in, or, they're nourishing their body differently or whatever. But thought is at the center of so much of our reality and what we're doing and what things mean to us. And it's the trigger that kicks off our whole emotional reality, right? So if we don't have any kind of management system of what we're thinking or what's going on, it's going to be a tough ride to deal with addictions or any of those behavioral things down kind of underneath that, because the source is the meaning making and the thinking that we're doing at the front of that.
Okay, so then our thoughts, or the way we think, positive or negative, can they become addictive, or is it the large neuronal bundles that are maybe keeping us in a negative pattern?
So, I mean, it's an interesting thought, like, can thoughts become addictive? I might say yes to that, right? So if you're I'm thinking about like porn addiction or different things like that, right? Or compulsions of some sort. That's not normally how I would talk about addiction, but they certainly could. I think just kind of to begin this talk, it's really important to realize that thought and biology are not just two completely separate realms. They deeply affect each other, and they're in this kind of process of whatever meaning making that you're doing is going to create a physical response to that. And that physical response speaks directly into your health status, right? Like how are you right now? And sometimes, an anxious thought is completely appropriate because you're in danger and you want that fight or flight to kick off. You want those different hormones to kick out and you want to react to it. But so many of us are in overly stressful situations continually when we're not really in danger. So many times we've learned to think in a certain way that is habitual, I would say, whether we call it addictive or not, it's habitual, right? It's been kind of made easier through the growing of those neuronal bundles and just the habit of how we talk to ourselves and how we think about the world, the kind of media that we're ingesting, right? All of these things, if you're repeatedly being told by the world, it's dangerous, everybody's fighting, we're all going to die, if that's what we're watching all the time, it builds a narrative, and it doesn't take very long for that to start to ground in and it ends up arguing for itself, right? It's a reason I don't feel safe. They say I'm not safe. And so all of a sudden I'm just making another thought of I'm not safe. And now I'm seeing not safe everywhere. That person across the street, instead of being a friend, becomes a possible danger and somebody maybe I should run away from. And, right now, and I don't want to date this necessarily, but we're dealing with the COVID pandemic, and things like just all of us wearing masks outside are really dehumanizing, and it's weird because you can't smile, you can't tell whether somebody's dangerous or not. You can't, you lose the connection to what we're used to in navigating the world. For people that are already a little paranoid or maybe overly anxious or have that system on high alert all the time, this could be even scarier. And so that can devolve us into being less healthy, more overwhelmed, and more of those stress hormones maybe being there too often, et cetera.
We only have an hour or two? But it's interesting. Earlier on in the conversation, you were talking about something and you did this to your temple. And that was a trigger for me because twice in my life I've had a gun put to my head. And I just realized in that moment, because I felt my body tense up and I went, oh my God, I thought I had worked all this out.
Right.
And that thought process started and I went and I caught it, but it was interesting. Just the image, just seeing you do that made me a little bit fearful.
Yes.
But we were talking about, I wrote all this down. Can you talk about, because I think, you were talking about, just reaching for a better thought, a more useful thought. So if someone's in despair, it's completely unreasonable for them to think, oh, I'm going to think happy thoughts and I'll be in joy in a minute.
I don't know that, I don't mean to interrupt you. I don't know that that's unreasonable.
Okay.
I don't want to sell that that's always going to be the case.
Yeah.
If you change your thought, you quite literally change your subjective reality immediately in the moment. And we can do like a little visualization that illustrates that really quickly. The problem is that most people aren't aware of what's happening with our attention and how important our attention is to what's sort of sourcing these thoughts. Most of them are on autopilot, either being influenced by the world that's happening to us and we're in some dysfunctional world, or we're watching scary things or whatever's happening, but we really don't have any kind of understanding of how our brain is making meaning and what is happening there. And so one of the things that I really like to do with people is simplify that down to make it much easier to be aware of how your thought is working and what's going on there. And then what you can do with that that's very useful to make us happier, more calm, more mature. And just here's a way to say it differently. Most of us are lost in thought. Right? There's levels of consciousness, and some people are lost in thought and they're not even aware of it. They don't even know it's happening. They just think that's the way the world is. Maybe a level that's, next to that would be people that can't stop thinking. Either they're ruminating all the time or they're just scattered all the time. And maybe they have a lot of negative thoughts like I'm not enough and people don't like me and I'll never succeed and that kind of stuff. And they're aware that they're thinking, but they have no concept of getting out of it, right? Like they don't know what to do about that. Once we get to the other side, we can start to realize that thought is not the only reality, right? There's two realities. There's thought and there's experience, and they're not the same. And that's what maybe this visualization can help with. But at level 3, we start to really have a much better ability to drop thought and come into experience, or maybe move thought around to more useful thinking. Okay. So we just gain a little bit more mastery. And then I often talk about level 4, where that just is much more on autopilot and you don't need to use practices and different things like that. You just become really masterful at managing your own attention and your own joy and your own emotional reality through all that. But if we don't know that, we end up lost in thought. What we can do instead is kind of put thought into the bucket where it's a tool that we can use and employ, which thought is amazing. But if you're lost in thought, it's the source of a lot of suffering and difficulty and just all the mental problems that come with that, right? The inability to focus, or things like OCD or compulsions, or, and these tend to lead to addictions and things so that we can feel better because we're so miserable in our mental reality of what's happening. So if we don't have any mastery over our thinking, I like to think, and it might be an oversimplification, but we're just sort of lost, right? It's very difficult to navigate this world if we don't have this next level of thinking. And that awareness is really what I call the fundamental shift, which is, what my mission is to help people shift that consciousness and understand it differently.
And that's kind of where I see it as a shift. And if you're just starting out in the practice, maybe it might be too much to think, oh, I want to be consistently in bliss. But if you've been in despair for so long, your whole life, it might be a shift. It might be just reach for relief, and then reach for contentment, and then maybe it gets easier over time. But can you talk about how simple tips and for maybe like shortening that refractory period between maybe something, there's a trigger and you have a response to it, and awareness? How do you even gain that awareness that something's going on up here? I mean, is it your body's telling you there's something, or is it,
For sure. So I definitely want to take you through this visualization, because that, I think, will give people an embodied experience of what I'm saying. But before we do that, I'll answer that, the sort of somatic indicators and that kind of stuff. Thoughts can be, especially if we have no access to being aware that we're doing it, it's hard to even say what a thought is versus what reality is. It just all feels very real to us, right? Someone will argue, no, this is going to happen, and all these things, and it's not here yet. They're just thinking about it. They don't realize it's just a thought, and they could think something else. They can't see that yet, right? So for people that have a hard time, and no matter what your level of, whatever level of consciousness is, or how evolved you are, very often our emotional reaction is the thing that we can notice, right? That's a little more tangible. That's a little more, oh, I'm scared, or, oh, I'm sad, or I'm really angry. And so oftentimes that's a good way to back up and go, why? Why is that happening? What is the meaning that I'm holding on to? And most of us don't challenge the meaning making that we're doing. We just assume that it's true because it's our perspective, and it's, well, they did the wrong thing, so now I'm mad. So of course I'm mad. That's right. But what we don't notice is that we're attached to something, and maybe it's now affecting our life in a way that's inappropriate or isn't helping us, right? So thoughts can be difficult to see, but emotions are much more obvious to us. So what we want to do is, when we're feeling a negative emotion or something that just we're suffering in whatever way, we want to back up and go, what is the meaning making that I'm doing that's leading to me feeling this way? And can I challenge that? Can I shift that? Can I think a different thought? Can I just move my attention somewhere else? And what you'll find is, if you just move your attention somewhere else, literally to a movie or going for a run or something else, you won't have that same emotional reality, because it requires a thought and the somatic experience together to create an emotion. And so we can talk about that more in a second, but if you're open to it, I'd love to do this visualization with you.
Do it.
Yeah. Does it make sense? Is it okay to close eyes and do all that stuff?
Yeah.
Right. Cool. So I'll invite, only if it's safe, if you're driving, don't do this. If you're listening or whatever, but if you're safe, you can sit down and just close your eyes. And I just want to do a really quick visualization. So just get centered into a way where you're seated and it's comfortable. And what I want you to do is, I want you to find sensation in your body somewhere. So what can you feel in your body? Can you maybe feel what your feet feel like? Can you maybe feel what your hands feel like? Can you notice what your breath feels like right at your nostrils, right at the rim of your nostrils? And you may notice that as you breathe in, the air might seem cool and dry. And as you exhale, it might seem a little bit more warm and maybe not as dry. And so as your attention is here, and you may think while this is happening, but as you do that, just as a practice while we're here, just ground back into the moment, into the sensation of your breath. And we'll just call this now. And while you're with your breath, we're not thinking about the breath. We're just experiencing the sensation of what your breath feels like. And we can move that attention around. Again, we could go back to what your feet feel like or what your seat feels like. And notice that we're moving your attention around in sensation. So now I want to take your attention somewhere else. I'm going to invite you to go to the past. I want you to remember a time when you were maybe 10 or 11 years old. Make it a good memory. And try to see all kinds of stuff about that time. Was it wintertime? Was it summertime? Were you with family? What were the colors? And we'll call this the past. And while you're in the past, in that memory, notice that you're not as connected to what your breath feels like. Your attention literally went to the past. So now we're going to build the skill of dropping the past. And all we need to do that is bring our attention back to breath. So just move your attention back to the physical sensation right at your nostrils. And we're just back in the present. Now we're going to move our attention to the future for a second. And what I want you to do is imagine a time maybe 3 years from now. And I want you to see an amazing future for yourself. The last 3 years have gone amazing, and you're at lunch with, maybe they're even like famous friends of yours or something. I want you to see where you're seated. I want you to see what is on the plate in front of you. I want you to notice the colors and the smells. And now we're in the future. And I want you to notice that when we're in the future, we're not in the past. We're not with our breath. We're in the future. And stay there for another second. Look to your right and notice what's to your right in the future. Look to the left. Maybe you see someone else that's really awesome and you wave and say hi. And now I want you to build the skill of just dropping the future and moving your attention back to your breath. And so now, while you're with your breath, you're back in the present. We'll just anchor in the here and now, the present, through sensation. We're going to go to just one more place. I want you to imagine for a second a large giraffe. But this giraffe is purple, and he's disco dancing in a club, which is really weird because he barely fits. His neck is all curved as he's stuffed in, but he's having a blast, and he's just dancing away. And there's a disco ball, and you have this purple giraffe. Maybe he's even wearing a hat. Really try to see this, and you're having a blast, just dancing, dancing, dancing. And notice that while you're with the giraffe, you're not really noticing your breath as much because we're with the giraffe in the disco. But you can drop imagination and you can come back to your breath. And at this moment, I just want you to notice what your breath feels like for another maybe 3 breaths. Take a deep breath in. Let it out. You can let your attention widen into more sensations in your body. Another deep breath in. Let it out. Notice if maybe you feel calm as you're in this moment. Take one more deep breath in. And let it out. And just feel the calm in your body. And when it's comfortable, you can open up your eyes and come on back. Okay, so there's a lot to take away from what we just did, all right? So one of the main things that I want you to take away from that is that we never really went anywhere, right? So when we're talking about going to the past, we went to the past and we remembered something, but you were always here, right? You never actually went anywhere. Your attention went somewhere, but you didn't go anywhere. Right? Your attention moved into the past. And I'm going to guess that you probably had to kind of create the past, right? And if we spent more time and I did a little longer visualization and I really got specific about it, you might have been grabbing like different things, right? Like all of a sudden your dad was there in your memory of the past, but he wasn't really there. And it was like a bike and there's like a friend there, but it's not like a real memory. Like you don't have a photographic memory of exactly what happened. We have to kind of construct that memory of the past, right? And do you guys get that? I mean, do you agree?
Yeah, well, I was just glad that you said make it a good memory, because
yeah.
I had kind of a not so great, and I was like, oh crap.
Well, we tend to remember.
I got a good one in there.
We tend to remember bad things more.
Yes.
It's as a survival thing. We're tracking the bad things much more, which is a really interesting thing to do with our identity. But to the same point, we never really went to the future, right? We had to kind of make that up. That was a fiction. And we certainly didn't really see a purple giraffe at a disco, right? So what I'm making my point there is that all of those places that we went to, whether it was the past or the future or imagination, they were all in thought, right? That's what thought is. And thought is so pervasive that it's all of time is in thought, right? We're always here. In fact, I've got the now tattoo since I was 19. I've had that on my wrist where a watch would go, because we're always here. Yet our mind is doing these things. And time is a very useful construct to meet for something like this meeting. And I'm not saying time isn't real, but psychological, personal, internal time is all in thought. And very often, anxiety and fear tend to live in the future, right? We're worried about things that are coming up. We're scared of something we might not be good enough for or whatever. Very often guilt and shame live in the past, right? And so these feel very real to us, but we can get lost worrying about the future and regretting the past and being lost in imagination of what ifs and all these different things. And so here's kind of a super useful takeaway to simplify down thought for everybody, right? The only place that there's only two places that you can be, right? You can either be in thought or in sensation, right? There's only two places that your mind or your attention can be. So I want you to realize that attention is a place, right? We place attention either out in imagination somewhere, or we put it in the past, or we put it in the future, and for many of us, this is deeply atrophied. So quite literally, this portion of our brain is not very strong or good at doing it unless we practice, unless we build up the neuronal bundles that are more used to doing this. But back in sensation, right? And so did you guys get more calm when you were just present and in this moment? Did you notice how that felt to be here?
Yeah.
Right? So all joy, it doesn't actually live in thought. It lives in this moment. Like it has to actually be here to experience, right? So, when we're feeling good, when we're having, if we're making love to our partner, or if we're eating a delicious piece of food, if we're anything that we're really enjoying, this is firing off sensations in us. But so many of us have let that atrophy that it becomes very addictive. It's like we're gobbling up the ice cream to just eat more ice cream to get to that next thing. But we can't really sit in the satiation of that one bite, right? Thich Nhat Hanh talks about eating just a little wedge of an orange and spending a half an hour just letting each little nodule break open in his mouth. Most of us eat an orange and we're like, nom, 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 that was great. Like, where's more orange? Or I've got to do this next thing, or we don't do it. So, who's wealthier there, right? That orange has so much to give us, just a simple wedge of an orange, that somebody could truly enjoy that for a half an hour or longer, but we fly right past it because we're lost in thought. We're on this treadmill of becoming. I'm not there yet. This isn't it yet. I'm not, I'm not enough. This isn't enough. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I don't have the right friends. I don't have the right house. I'm not where I'm supposed to be, which is a delusion. I need to get there, right? But there is no there. There's really only here. So it's not there that we need to get to. We actually need to get here, really grounded and happy and resourced and understanding how to actually live healthily in the present, and then using thought to model time and all the important things, but right size that. So if we can build the awareness of where our attention is, we can start to learn how to drop thought when we're overwhelmed by it, when we're overexcited or anxious or depressed or whatever it is, because we're ruminating or we're scattered or we're judging something too much. So the ability to literally drop thought, right, and come into sensation is a way to cut that off. And it works the first time you do it, but we get better at it if we do practice it or if something else comes up, right? So really important to know there's only two places that our mind can be, either in thought or in sensation. And then the really incredible skill to learn is, number one, I can move from a not useful thought that's upsetting me or is, doing whatever, to something useful like gratitude. What could I could I imagine my mom and how much I love her? Could I imagine a sunset or do whatever, right? That's just moving from a, quote unquote, bad thought to a good thought. And that's incredibly useful. Or we can leave thought altogether and just come into sensation and be present. And that cuts off the incessant negative thinking as well. Is that helpful? Does that make sense?
Yes. And again, so much packed in there. I feel like a lot of us, from the time we wake up in the morning, we are consumed by what we have to do and the time we have to do it with. Mm-hmm. And that in itself creates tension, like in the body and but and you
depending on how you think about it.
Yes.
So when you're noticing that that's creating tension, can you change to a thought of, I love what I do, right? Instead of like, I hate this, I don't have enough time. Quite literally, what if you instead thought, I've got plenty of time? Instead of thinking, I'm not where I'm supposed to be, what if you actually said to yourself, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, right? And literally just thinking that new thought changes the experience in the body. Again, with some lag, right? But it works immediately, right? It's still better. Now, the habituation of, doubting that and going back, right? That's one of the first breakthroughs we really need to have. Can we decide that other thing and stay there a little more? Now, in the beginning, you're not going to stay there all the time. You're going to want to go back. It's going to be invited again. But that's the practice of beginning to quite literally change who you are and how your whole brain functions.
Yeah.
Can I ask, mm-hmm. What if somebody were to say that sounds like escaping reality? Like, if you have a whole lot to do and instead of doing it, you're like, oh, well, I have plenty of time. And then maybe you do something else, or just not dealing with the problem at hand, I guess. Could somebody...
What's funny is that that assumes that what you're thinking is reality. Right?
That's true.
And if you notice, everything that we thought about in that example, taking you to the past, the future, imagination, etc., none of it was real. All of it was your personal. We didn't share any of it. It was, my past was different than yours, right? My future would be completely different than yours. The smells, who was at the table that we were imagining, none of that's real, right? The problem is that we think that's real. We think our problems are real. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't real things to deal with, right? So, quote unquote, what is real or what is true is a very deep conversation. And if you think that this is packed, if we start to get into that will be much, much deeper, because truth is way weirder than we think it is. Okay. And now there are some parts of truth that are quite obvious and it's easy for us all to agree upon them, but it gets weird very, very quickly. Right? If we get into memories and those kinds of things, they get weird very, very quickly. But that argument for this is my reality is important. I recently did a podcast where I was sharing a story of somebody I was at dinner with, and the person I was at dinner with was trying to study for an exam that she was doing. She's got kids. She's a single mom, and she had a lot to deal with. But I will absolutely agree with that. We were at dinner, and she was describing how in the future it was going to be so hard to get a job, how in the future it was going to be so hard to do that job because how could she possibly parent? In the future it was going to do all these things. And then she goes, and that's just my reality. And I kind of laughed internally because I was like, none of that is happening now. Not that she does have kids. She is going to have to get a job. I'm sure some of that will be difficult. It's not that she's inaccurate, but her going to it and the reaction that her body has from that panic But whatever she's imagining is not going to exactly come true. She's not a seer of the future in a way where, right? So what's useful is how can she think about that, not to your point in a way that's delusional, but in a way that's much more useful in what can be done instead of what will never be done. Or, somebody will argue to me, I'm a loser. I've always been a loser. And to them, it feels very true. But I'm sure there's countless times they've won at something, right? But they'll argue, no, I lost the girl, I lost the money, I just lost my job. In fact, I just lost my car before I got on this call with you, Rob, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll go, that's fine. And it may even have a historical truth to it, right? Where people would all agree that all those things happened. But for that person to say that then means I'm a loser, and that's their truth, that they take that on as an identity thing, is completely a fiction. However, it's so thoughts are not true. Thoughts are thoughts. But the more we think them, the more they tend to express themselves in our life, right? The more I say I'm a loser, the more I believe I'm a loser, the more I go into meetings thinking, how am I going to lose, right? The more I used to show up as a victim, the more I would find ways to be a victim so that could stay true for me. Now, if I just thought a more useful thought, I don't mean a delusional one, but a more useful one, and that's part of the art of this, right? Then we can get connected to what can be done. What's realistic? What's a better way to think about this that keeps me healthier, that keeps me more resourced in this moment, instead of in a panic thinking that all those horrible things that could happen are happening now, right? Which is how our body is responding to it. All of those stresses are happening now. The adrenals are going, the cortisol's firing, right? All that stuff is happening, but none of it's real. None of it's here yet. So is there a different and better way to think about it? Of course there is, because people, can handle that. They can handle the kids and the job and the whole thing.
When we were doing the exercise and we went to the future and there's dinner and you were saying, see what's being served for dinner. And in my mind, I wanted it to be like a little tower of crab and avocado with some tomato coulis, but they showed up with scallops. And in my mind, I was going, this is my dream. I get to pick. Why is this happening? So again, so I want to kind of go back and talk a little bit like deeper, if you can, about the importance of appreciation and meditation and staying in those areas of the brain, and why is that significant in this whole process?
Yeah, so we started off thinking about, what if you spent the next 10 minutes deciding to worry about everything that could be bad, right? That's going to lead to a certain physical response and subjective experience of living, of being alive. And I think we'd all agree it wouldn't be amazing, right? If we were just to think of all the horrible things that have ever happened or all the things we're scared of, that would be it could be some form of hell for 10 minutes, right? It could be that way that we could create a panic when nothing's really going on. That's the power of thinking. Instead, if you bring up gratitude as an example, I have something called the 3G3 practice, right? Which is just 3 conscious breaths to get really centered, 3 things that you're grateful for in a way where you're really trying to connect with the embodied sensation of it, and then 3 more conscious breaths on the end where you're just really sitting in that feeling of gratitude. There are so many studies that prove the power of gratitude and what it does for health and how you can overcome clinical depression doing that. And there's studies where that beats pharmaceuticals, right? And it certainly beats placebo often. So some type of gratitude practice is a phenomenal thing. And all it is moving our attention consciously from how the world might be inviting us to be overwhelmed or scared or whatever. We're gaining agency of our attention and saying, I'm going to actually move it to something I'm grateful for. And so if we build any kind of a practice doing that, we start building up the neuronal bundles of gratitude, right? It starts to become easier and easier to feel thankful, grateful, wealthy, right? That's what feeling grateful is. Like, that's a feeling of wealth and, abundance, right? And so we start to habituate wealth, abundance, connection, love, instead of anxiety, fear, survival instincts, all those things, right? And so a practice of mindfulness is a way where we can really change our relationship with thinking. right? So many people think that that's what Buddhists do, or that's an Eastern thing and I'm Western. And we have these assumptions of what it is. It's really just like a workout for our brain to understand and put thought in the right place, so that, again, we can use thought as a tool instead of being lost in thought and have, all our meaning making be thinking everything is real, everything is happening that's, the worst thing in the world. So practices like a gratitude practice or a meditation practice are where we can start to strengthen and gain a little bit more mastery of our attention by putting it in different places consciously, whether that's in the feeling of our body through some mindfulness practice, or to a more useful thought like gratitude, or other practices, or like loving kindness practices, things like that. And that goes back to highlight how attention is a place. We can move it ourselves if we become aware of that, right? We can move our attention, and it's good to move it from overwhelming negative things that aren't useful, that we're suffering from, and move it to things that are going to cause, more well-being, more happiness, etc. And one of that is moving in thought to something that's more positive, or dropping thought altogether and coming into experience. Those are the two places where it's useful to move our attention.
We went back and we looked at a memory that wasn't necessarily exactly what happened. We kind of recreated something. At least for me, I know I have a vague memory of something and I just added details, whether or not that was exactly correct.
Yeah.
But for me, it worked. So can you use memory or create a memory to help you on your journey? I mean, whether it's like when you had cancer, did you use any of the tools to imagine yourself well or see yourself well, or?
Yeah. So memory is really, really important, and it's very, very interesting. So first off, memory is incredibly flawed, and we're learning this more and more rapidly as we really get into like neurology and understanding what's happening and what we're doing there. We have incredible biases. We tend to remember things incorrectly. We weight different memories differently. So, we tend to remember a lot of bad things that happen. And there's survival functions to a lot of this, but it doesn't mean it's accurate, and it doesn't mean it's exactly what happened. Daniel Kahneman talks about the experiencing self and the remembered self, and how they're very different, right? The experiencing self is much more accurate, like what's really going on now. We can report what happened, but the remembered self is far less accurate. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is we have duration neglect. We forget how long things were a certain way. We tend to remember peaks and valleys instead. And there's something specifically called the peak end rule, where think of a vacation, we tend to remember what happened at the end and code that for the whole experience, which is like an efficiency or a bias of the brain. So when I talk about identity, one of the ways to think about identity is that it's a psychological continuity for ourselves, about ourselves, that we carry through time. And so much of that is based on what we remember happened to us and what that meant to us. So, somebody in 8th grade says, "You're ugly." We might take on, "I'm ugly." That might really stand out and end up as a part of our psychological continuity of quote unquote who we are. We might be a really incredibly beautiful person. I mean, I tend to think everybody's beautiful in their own way. And right. So it just depends on, what does beauty even mean? What is that person's, what they said at that time and in that moment? Does that mean that we have to take it on as a whole thing for us? But we take on embarrassing moments and traumatic moments and all, and we make meaning about the world that ends up leading to what our story is about the world and about ourselves, etc. Okay. So if we think about it, our sense of self ends up being largely based on something that's incredibly inaccurate. It's weighted incorrectly. It's misremembered. People have arguments all the time about what happened when, right? Like husband and wife will have an argument about last Friday, and like, that was 2 months ago and you didn't do it, I did it, and I told you about it, and you're remembering it as you. It's incredibly inaccurate, and yet this is the meaning that we're making up and we're carrying about ourselves. Therapy as a practice, one of the most valuable things that can come out of therapy, or one of maybe the greatest accomplishments of that, is helping people recode the meaning of really bad things that have happened to them, right? So abuse when you were a child, or your mom abandoning you, or a breakup that was horrible. One of the ways that we can survive that is working with a coach or a therapist or somebody who's talented enough to help you rethink what that memory meant to you. So one of the ways that I've done that in my life, as I shared before, I went through a lot of abuse. I have all kinds of ways that I could remember that, right? I could make that to mean that I'm just, a horrible person that doesn't deserve to be alive. And I mean, those are things I used to hear, right? Wish you were never born. You shouldn't live here. I'll kill you, right? These kinds of things. And so it's going back and instead recoding that to be one of the most meaningful things that's ever happened to me, being the source of what my whole life is about. Now I'm committed to doing work in the world that gives me purpose and does things that, Martin Seligman talks about, when you really can connect into what your purpose is, that's one of the best ways to have a really flourishing life. And I've now been given this enormous purpose to try to live into. And so every day I get to work on that. And I promise you, even if I wasn't able to make money or do it, I'd still be doing this. Like, there's no way you could stop me from doing this, right? So it's very odd to say it, but I'm incredibly grateful for all the things that happened to me. But part of that is because I'm choosing to make that meaning in that way. And so figuring out how we can recode memories and change their meaning and really remember other things that happen. And to your point, maybe even create them, because it doesn't matter that much. If you would like to do things like self-parenting or reparent yourself, go back in a visualization and be the parent that you didn't have and talk yourself out of something, you tend to scratch the record of the memory in a way that can be really valuable if you've got a memory that's holding you back or is affecting your identity in a negative way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I actually did use something like that after the injury for me, and I actually deliberately tried to use my thinking and kind of an aligned emotion and kind of trick my body into thinking it's happening or it's already happened. And it took some time and it took dedication. And my belief anyway, I choose to believe that was part of what helped me.
Yeah.
I hope you're not disappointed that we just cut you off in what seems like the middle of a really wonderful interview. But hang on, there is more to come tomorrow. But we wanted to give you time to digest the information that Rob shared with us today. He has a really unique perspective and so much food for thought that we wanted to spread it out over 2 days so that you could really have time to absorb what he's saying, because it really is important.
It is. And you know what? How many of us really ever think about what we think about and how that impacts our body? But our thoughts have biological responses in our body. There's a chemical reaction to what we're thinking at all times. And I loved every minute of it, but I especially loved bringing it back to the breath, because it is so simple yet so powerful. Something we can do every single day.
Absolutely. Very profound. And like you said, just really simple. But how many of us will even think about doing that? We're always told, take deep breaths. But just a really simple mantra that you can incorporate into your life, bring it back to breath. And if we all did that, how many of us would be able to just step back and view a situation differently and have a profound effect on our health and our lives in general? Instead of going, ooh, I want that chocolate cake, go back to breath. You know what? I don't think I want that cake anymore. How simple could that be?
It is. It's so simple, but it's, sometimes we need somebody like Rob to point these things out to us, right? And to bring it into the limelight. We don't think about these things, but it's very empowering to know, right? And even just the idea that you can't be in thinking and sensing at the same time. It's one or the other. That was really interesting.
Very interesting. And I'm so glad that he is sharing his wisdom that he learned through his own life with the rest of us. And I know you're going to enjoy tomorrow. Tomorrow is full of unique perspective and useful information again. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.